seeing her husband and his mistress in court. Samantha only grinned. And when she handed over an important document. Samantha arrived at the cafe 10 minutes early. But Tiffany seemed to have been sitting at the far table by the window, surrounded by artificial ivy like a garden arbor. It wasn't a very well-located place. And it wasn't even clean, but it wasn't even clean. But it wasn't too far from where Tiffany worked. It would be disgraceful to ask Tiffany to take public transport across town in the middle of the day to talk for a few minutes, and then take the same transport back. Samantha had more control over her time and personal transport. One day Samantha asked how Tiffany had the patience to drive across town to work at the salon. The answer was simple and worldly. The Naples salon is a prestigious and popular place. It has high traffic and good earnings. To get here is a great luck. They won't hire just anyone, so you have to travel. Tiffany proudly called herself a nail technician. Turns out that's a step up from being a nail technician. Samantha was completely far from the rules of this money world, indifferent to glamour and never bothered with the prestige of salons. 2 years ago, a mate had simply recommended Tiffany's to her. Mole, a really nice girl, immediately grasps all the wishes of the client, and she's a real nice person to talk to. Samantha wasn't looking for a chat. She herself liked to chat with a nice person, so after 6 months she and Tiffany switched to you. Samantha just hated being addressed as you. It was only appropriate, she thought, for institutions like schools, police, and customs. The owner of the Naples couldn't know that. But Tiffany had grown in her eyes because of her ability to establish an informal relationship with a customer. In general, Samantha and Tiffany got along very well, although they did not become girlfriends, and they never met outside the salon. Samantha usually bypassed the salon receptionist by simply calling Tiffany and asking her to make an appointment for a convenient time for a pedicure or manicure. It was always fine, no overlaps, so Tiffany never called back. Suddenly yesterday, before Samantha could send the customer the blueprints and think about dinner, there was a call from Tiffany. Samantha, who wasn't going to the salon anytime soon, was surprised. "Hi, Tiffany." An unexpected call. "Didn't you quit your job at Naples? Because suddenly you're notifying your regular clients that you're upgrading to the next level," she said. "Ugh. That doesn't seem very natural," Tiffany laughed. "I'm fine. I just have an important conversation to have. We should definitely get together soon. It won't take you long, but it's very important." "It's not a phone call at all." "What's it about in a nutshell?" "Yeah, it's not a phone conversation," Tiffany confirmed. "I'm working at Naples tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, but I can meet you after work. It'll be 9 at night, though." "Yeah? Well, after work is not an option. Then you'll be like a lemon," Samantha countered. "I just sent my client some thinking material today. He'll spend 2 days thinking about it. And the second order is a long playing one, so I'm still relatively free, and I can come to you during your break." "Well, if it's convenient for you, that's fine. Thank you. Make it 12. I've got a window in my appointment. I'll be waiting at the Allegia on the corner, where all the guys get their coffee." That's where Tiffany was waiting for Samantha under the shade of fake ivy. "How long have you been waiting?" "I thought I got here early." "No, I've been sitting here for 10 minutes. I jumped out early on purpose, just in case someone came in unannounced by the law of dumb luck, and then you'd have to wait for me." "Come on," Samantha grinned conciliatorily. "As long as it's worth it. Well, spill your secrets." Tiffany looked away from the bar, and something in her face told Samantha that the news was neither curious nor funny. The waiter came over, and they ordered double espressos. Tiffany seemed to make herself perk up a little, fixing her frizzy hair, and said, "Okay, there's no point in stalling. You may remember that I told you a long time ago that in our work we hear a lot of personal stories from our clients. But a lot of us also become the transmission link in the chain of gossip." "Of course we do. I remember once we spent an entire pedicure session discussing the specifics of our work," Samantha said. "You talked about your principle of not gossiping, just sharing information with another client. Both because you hate gossiping and just to keep you out of trouble at work. I really don't know anything about your other clients. I wouldn't have known before you. My clients' personal lives are none of my business, and we're not friends. If it were anyone else, I'd just shut up. I'm not trying to be your friend. You and I have a good human relationship, and I appreciate that. Don't inflame the atmosphere, Samantha asked with a smile. I'm already burning up inside with curiosity. Soon I'll be burning on the outside. Anyway, Tiffany began. 2 months ago, I started seeing a new client for Naples, nothing out of the ordinary. Well-groomed blonde, 28 tops, dresses with a pretense of style. In fact, she's just dressed flamboyantly. If she keeps this up, she'll lose her taste by the time she's 40. Most of the time, she's a gentle, modest woman in conversation, but she's probably not. Likes to assert herself by talking about gifts received from her boyfriend, trips of all kinds. She's excited to show off her new clothes. She wants me to be excited, and I am. It's part of my job. I am not sorry. And the man is pleased. He will come to me with pleasure. I do not care in what to support the client, as long as she was not scandalous, boorish. The others are all fine. In general, everything as usual. And then the day before yesterday comes my Emily, all beautiful tanned, says that just returned from some paradise Mediterranean, where in June is already the best. I remember now from Cyprus, I spent a week there with my boyfriend. Emily continued. That's only because he's a busy businessman, I realized. Otherwise he'd have been driving her round the seas non-stop. I was happy for her, noting that she looked good. She immediately took out her phone and flipped through the photos. She started to show and tell me how they ate small tender squid stuffed with something. He bought her a collector's ring from some cool jeweler. While I was giving her an iron-on, orange-colored French coat, her mouth was hanging open so much so that she was eager to share personal things. Then it turns out that her boyfriend is quite a solid man by age. He recently turned 42. Of course he is married, but his wife has not loved for a long time, just lived out of habit until he met her. Albina's wife has been trying to boss him around all his life, Emily said. She only thinks of herself. She's all about her work, and she teaches her daughters the same beliefs how important it is to find your own business. Blah, blah. But really, it's more of a Ponzi scheme. Wife's been a daddy's girl since she was a kid. She didn't have to break through in life, even live only on her own earnings. First her father took care of her, then her husband. With such starting opportunities, everyone manages to find himself. But he had to achieve everything himself from scratch, even from a disadvantage, without help, only with obstacles. This is a completely different attitude to life. He and his wife are completely different people. Emily would have realized this even without his words as soon as she got into his flat. He brought her home several times while his wife was away. You can tell from the atmosphere what kind of woman his wife is, and the most important thing for him is to get warmth from a woman. He'll provide her with everything else. That sort of thing. What a wonderful and misunderstood fellow Emily is, Tiffany exclaimed. Emily alone is his lifeline. And he talks about it so often, even though she doesn't ask, that he loves her. I don't hear that kind of talk from Samantha all that often, but Emily's is especially emotional. She just went out with a friend. We had champagne and she came to me still in character, so to speak. And at the end, she even decided to show me a photo with her lover to say, "What do you think?" Honestly. I prepared to approve with restraint, to say that I understand her somewhere. And then I look at the first photo and I see your husband, Norman. He and Emily embracing in front of a seaside Italian restaurant. Then there's another picture of them together in a jewelry shop window, and a few more by the bar and pool, at the hotel by the sea, on Aphrodite's beach. I showed 20 of them, and I sighed. Well, you can see we're having a good time. We can't hide it together, Emily said. Listening to Tiffany, Samantha had forgotten about her coffee, now hurriedly drinking it in 2 gulps. Tiffany stopped talking, took a breath, and added, I think it's right that I told you. I'm sorry I wasn't in a stupor right after Emily left. My mind knows what I should say. But it's the first time I've ever had someone confide in me, and I've treated them like that. On the other hand, if a person is stupid and shows pictures of a married lover to everyone, it would have happened to her sooner or later anyway. Tiffany, thank you. Quick and quiet. Samantha interrupted. It's not gossip, it's help. Again, thank you so much for your help. This is not a case where the truth is better left unsaid. I've always considered myself capable of digesting the truth. Your reputation at the salon won't be damaged at all. I'll come up with another source with Emily and embarrass myself. I'm not going to run either. Anyway, you don't have to worry. I'm perfectly adequate. Samantha smiled wryly and got up from the table. Okay, we should get going. You have to work late, Tiffany, and I'm going to the photo exhibit. I need it for work, and it'll take my mind off things. It's all in my head, Samantha said. I'll probably call you in a week to make an appointment for a pedicure. I just haven't figured out my own schedule yet. Bye, honey. Bye. Call me for sure, was all Tiffany could say to the bewildered, confused woman. She couldn't even figure out if it was a good thing for a woman to be so in control. Most of the girls Tiffany knew would have found a bag of insulting words for her husband and mistress right now, and would have run in hot pursuit to say them to her face. And certainly no one would even bring up the painful reputation. She immediately from the first meeting realized the instinct of a person who has been working with people for a long time. Samantha is an interesting person. It's the kind of clientele that makes you love your job. Grandma Cynthia, if she were alive, would have a caustic reaction right now. I told you so she'd be right when her prescient predictions came true. That said, Samantha couldn't recall her grandmother ever predicting a good development. All bold endeavors of family and friends, work and personal, were bound to fail if they did not meet her grandmother's strict standards. These standards rested on an immutable "this is the way it should be." It was useless to point out to Grandma the weaknesses in her theory of the world order. She instantly became blind and deaf, and any logic was shattered against this wall. It may well be that because of the character of her own mother, her son Jasper, Samantha's father, turned out to be so imperturbable and ironic. Arguing with such a rock as a grandmother can brutally harden one's temper, or, on the contrary, one can realize that arguing with her looks very funny. When Samantha was named Samantha simply because she was born in March, Mom and Dad also liked the name. Grandma's indignation was unbounded. Aren't there enough Russian names? Non-Russian names can only call animals. And here a girl will be called Samantha, like a cat. And in general, women with difficult and rare names are rarely happy. Somewhere I've heard of such an omen, Grandma said. Mum, why am I not some ancient Roman Caesar? The son answered questioningly, maintaining his trademark equanimity. Jasper's name is of ancient Greek origin, Jasper. With Samantha's greatest name, it sounds good. That's what we'll call it. We'll all forget the silly omens the greatest said his word. When Grandma Cynthia realized she had lost the battle, given up, it didn't take long for her to find new opportunities for outrage or prediction. But it would be naive to think that she had forgotten her old warnings. As soon as something went wrong, Grandma would appear behind the backs of those involved, as if out of thin air, and say, "I told you so." Grandma's reaction was often harder to bear than the incident itself. So they always tried to hide all the blunders from her until the last. When Samantha was about to marry Norman, Granny was particularly upset. Is that any way to shake the air in a big room, running your footsteps across the parquet floor? Have you read too many stupid books? And you think a misunderstanding like that can make a happy marriage? No, I'm not saying that Norman doesn't like you, compared to the girls in his town. You're very attractive. I'm more than sure. But what he's really in love with is the opportunities this marriage offers him. Not every guy in the neighborhood is that lucky. He can see that your father will help his son-in-law. You grew up in a hothouse environment and have no idea how claws and teeth are used to cling to life from childhood. People like him, it's written in his eyes and forehead that he knows how to instantly see his advantage. He's just using you to climb higher. Grandma, what's wrong with that? You're the one who said if Father Norman could help Norman. I remember you said talent should be helped. Talentless people will make it on their own. Norman will work on his father's recommendation, in his speciality, which he got at the institute he entered, by the way, by himself, working and studying at the same time. Who cares what kind of family you come from if you behave normally? Certainly not me and those with whom I socialize. And to hear you tell it, our family is the closest to the emperor. We're just ordinary people. We don't even have enough money, sometimes Grandma Cynthia interjected. It's only because your father, and even more so your mother, are spendthrifts. Your mother can squander in a couple of months money that a sensible person would live on for a year. That's her special gift. Okay, so when's this stupid wedding of yours? We need to book a banquet hall that's not too cramped. Cramped spaces ruin the best banquet arrangements. "Grandma, we just decided to have a small cafe with just the closest people, a couple of friends on both sides." Grandma's outrage has taken a new turn. "Have you forgotten about the family? They're only aunts, people 20. How will you not call them? Weddings and funerals are an occasion to gather the whole family. That's how it's supposed to be." As usual, a month after Samantha and Norman had returned from their wedding journey after a modest, tasteful wedding in a small circle, her grandmother had come to terms with all the blatant violations of order and tradition. But contrary to Samantha's hopes, Grandma Cynthia made an exception for Norman. She had faithfully and devotedly disliked him for the rest of her life. "Yes, Grandma, you didn't live to see your triumph. I'd like to think you'd have been more sad for me than pleased with your insight. And Mom didn't live to see it. Or she would have just sympathized. Although there would have been a lot of tears." Samantha went round the exhibition for the third time, stopping at the pictures that made her think better of herself. She was already being eyed suspiciously from her chair by the auntie curator. One way or another, the conversation could not be avoided. One must endure it somehow, just once. But not in this flat. She won't be able to come back here anytime soon. She needs to let the unpleasant emotions settle down a bit. Tonight she'll just go to her father and tell him the truth. And Evelyn's daughter will have to call and tell her. But Evelyn's better off later. Let the daughter's session be over. There's a week left. There are those pesky people who don't live and don't let others live. They're the ones who think it's shameful to want to live a life of pleasure. But the truth is, everybody wants it. It's just that not everyone can do it. So they make up beautiful excuses for themselves. But no one has ever clearly explained why she, Emily, should live like her mother from paycheck to paycheck, always saving money on herself first. No, of course she could want more, but then she'd have to study hard and then work hard. You will pretend that you are interested in the prosperity of other people's uncle's business. Make a career. You will go to the top someday, when you are already tired, exhausted, almost old. In general, without successful parents, still nothing. And there are no guarantees of future prosperity in this case. Therefore, to live in their own pleasure the most reasonable endeavor. But of course, such an opportunity will not appear by itself, but fortunately for girls, has long since invented a proven way generous men. Of course, nowadays generous men are fewer and fewer, but they are not so rare as some losers try to prove. Just need to catch the essence, what exactly a man lacks for happiness, and give it to him. And in return, he will want to take care of you. There's no cheating at all. It's honest. Two people love each other, each gives the other what he can. The girl gives love and tenderness, the man gives care and patronage. There's nothing better than the old classics Emily's ex-boyfriend, with whom she had come to this town, had argued. True, he had said it on a different subject, but it applied to male-female relationships too. Emily's ex-boyfriend Kyle was a musician, gorgeous on both electric and regular guitars. In their sleepy little town, where there was basically nothing to make a decent living on, his earnings were considered even good. The two of them and DJ Andrew were invited to family corporate holidays. Anyone who could pay anything besides the food. A holiday without Kyle and Andrew, as they'd invented to call themselves to warm up the audience, was considered poor. So anyone who wanted to show off their wealth invited the two of them. In the end, Kyle always had money to live on. And his girlfriend, whom he preferred to call Emily, could always count on interesting weekends, gifts and urgent financial help in different situations. Emily's friends were openly jealous, and their boyfriends quietly hated Kyle, compared to whom they usually lost. However, Emily's mother did not approve of her daughter's choice precisely because of the guy's profession. The whole bohemian thing is very unreliable, Mum objected. When life turns into a never-ending holiday, people sew and drink unnoticed, and the girls are always twirling their tails in front of their eyes. A proper man's job would be much more reliable. Yeah, like our dad, Emily rolled her eyes. Of course, in the garages nobody gets drunk, but there's no strength left for girls. And there's no money for them either. It's 100% reliable. Don't be rude to your mother, you owe everything to me and your father. You first at least achieve something, and then, thinking yourself smarter than us, immediately go to shout. Mum would raise her voice. Emily, in such cases, immediately began to cry. It was a win-win. Mum's tears always stopped her daughter crying. She's such a kind person, it's silly not to take advantage of it. "Oh, do what you want," she grumbled pretentiously, instantly lowering the volume. "Your life." Mum was wrong about Matthew. DJ Andrew, on the other hand, was really starting to let his partner down more and more often. When there was money to be made, Kyle was nervous and thinking out loud, sharing his thoughts with Emily. "There's already a dead end here. At first, when I was just a kid, everything was fine, but now I have to move on." "You can't make that much money on your own without a DJ," Kyle thought. "And with Andrew, I don't need anything as long as I get a drink. It's no use talking to him. He just looks at me like I'm an enemy. More and more, I think I should go to a big city. I wouldn't try to work in the capital. But the regional center is the best. I've saved some money. At first, I can rent a flat for 6 months and live, look around, find something. Would you come with me?" Emily wasn't sure if Kyle was asking seriously, but just in case, she rushed to answer. "Don't doubt it for a minute. I'm sure you'll make it work." Emily didn't even want to imagine Kyle going anywhere alone. Then she could forget about him right away, and it wasn't easy to find another guy like him without leaving their town. As she looked through the acquaintances who'd expressed even the slightest interest in her, Emily realized that none of them would make such a beautiful relationship. Everyone had some problems: who helps her mother and father financially, who saves money for large purchases. Life doesn't go on like that. Of course, in the town there were owners of shops and small food production, but they were all family, with children. And the lives of these local stars were closely followed by the town gossip. It wasn't uncommon for the girls Emily had known since childhood to leave to study or work in the big cities. But Emily herself would not dare to go far away from home alone. Of course, to sit all her life in the accounting department of the local motor depot, she did not want to. But time was running out. To go to the big city, it's the first years of half a salary to spend on rent, to save on everything, herself to cook in the evening dinner for tomorrow. Emily valued her comfort too much to sign up for all that. At least at home, her mum did the chores. But going somewhere not alone with a caring Kyle might be a chance. Kyle wasn't kidding. He'd met a guy through some social media community who was looking for a guitarist for a holiday band. A totally familiar theme, but a theme. They'd even managed to get a deal with a medium-sized restaurant for the summer season. "So Emily, shall we go?" Kyle asked in a serious tone that demanded an immediate answer. "Let's go," Emily said quietly. Her mother was shocked to hear of this sudden decision. When she realized that she couldn't talk her out of it, she begged her not to tell her father. She would tell him herself when Emily had already left. Of course, the father will still make noise, but not as long and loudly as he would have spoken if Emily had been in front of him. The head accountant of the motor depot, having received the dismissal notice, curved her lips contemptuously and warned Emily that there was a queue of candidates who were quicker than she was to take her place. And if the girl was unlucky in the big city, she would not be taken back, the place would simply be taken. Those jobs are practically hereditary. "Have you really thought it over and weighed it all up?" she asked generously one last time. "Seriously," Patricia Emily confirmed. As she left the depot, she didn't dare to look back for a long time. To be honest, she was a little scared that she'd risked such a change in her stable life. When the euphoria of moving to a big city lasted only a few days, Emily quickly realized that things didn't work out the way she'd planned, and that was something she just had to accept. At least for now. This town was rapidly changing Kyle. He was no longer the generous Andrew she'd known and loved in their hometown. "Until I start earning properly, we have to save money," Kyle said. "I know it's not a lifelong thing. We just need to get a foothold here. You see, we're paying like a penthouse for this one bedroom. So let's have dinner with you at home for now. I don't need a Michelin restaurant. Just some fried potatoes and meat." "You asked me 5 minutes earlier if I had any answers to my CV," Emily reminded him. "Are you telling me that after working in accounting I should also be frying potatoes?" "What do you care?" Kyle said in an honest tone. "When I'm free in the evening, I'll cook. I'm not going to dump all the chores on you. Don't worry, I don't respect men like that myself. If we get a little rich, if we make some money, we'll be back to treating you to more restaurants." I could tell from Kyle's tone that it would only take a couple of months to get rich. In fact, in 6 months, Emily could already compile a whole list of bitter warnings for inexperienced girls who decided to make such a move. She realized wistfully that her life wasn't getting any better. There were so many tempting ways to spend her time around, but suddenly there were no opportunities. She worked 5 days a week in the accounting department of a small business and earned more than in her hometown. But the landlord had raised the rent, and Kyle's earnings were unstable. He didn't get along with the band leader whose invitation he'd come here to join, and so far he was trying to survive on his own, which made Emily quietly terrified. What was he waiting for? That the money would run out and he'd have to go home and feel the smirks of his acquaintances behind his back. That he'd failed to conquer the world. They were drifting further and further apart. He stopped being gentle and attentive, stopped having it all with her. He'd stand at the cooker and fry his potatoes or scrambled eggs with a fierce intensity. Emily tried to eat lunch at the inexpensive cafe in the business center where she worked, and hardly ate dinner at all, just to avoid fiddling in the kitchen. She felt that something had to change, but she had no idea how. She was used to relying more on luck than on herself. Grateful luck did smile on Emily soon enough. She did meet the man she had long had her eye on, and managed to impress him with her gentle manners. Her new hero drove to work in the same large downtown business center as she did. He drove a not too new, but quite decent car. An adult, probably in his 40s or early 40s. Hardly your average manager. Those suits are like neat uniforms. But this one is dressed stylishly, with all sorts of interesting accessories and obviously not cheap. After noticing and appreciating him, Emily even decided to do some spending. She stopped getting coffee at the cheap coffee shop where she had a business lunch and went to the stylish cafe he frequented. Soon the pleasant stranger began to recognize the familiar gentle face at the table by the column and nodded at Emily when he spotted her in the cafe. And soon he was in the habit of looking first of all in the direction of that table. As soon as he set foot on the threshold, he looked for her. Not to rejoice prematurely, Emily decided to test her hunch, changed her favorite place, and chose another table in a dark corner. She was overjoyed when the stranger looked round the tables in confusion, and when he noticed her, he smiled broadly. So he had memorized her face after all. Now he couldn't wait to speed things up. Emily got along well with her boss, the head accountant. The two of them worked together in a tiny office separate from production. It was more profitable for the owner. When it's just the two of you, you get to know each other. Emily couldn't hide her surprise when she found out that Amanda, the head accountant, was the same age as her mum. She looked much younger, and she talked and thought about other things. Emily decided to discreetly show her stranger's name and ask Amanda if she knew who he was. Yes, interesting, Amanda confirmed. No, I don't know. He looks young to me. And I don't get involved in such ventures. I'm more comfortable with guys my own age. You don't have to think they're not. He's perfect for you and he's older. You're young and beautiful to him anyway. Peers take your beauty for granted. Amanda could have kept talking about men for a long time if it weren't for the reporting period. Her ability to switch and instantly become a different person was enviable when the CEO showed up. Amanda became so businesslike and formal that Emily was even afraid of her. Ask the bartenders, Amanda said. They're not bad guys. They wouldn't mind helping a girl like you. Emily did the next day. Why had she never talked to the bartender until now, even though she'd known them for a long time? Contrary to Emily's fears, Jason the bartender didn't even smirk and generally took the question in a businesslike, nonchalant manner. It's an old, loyal customer. He's been a favorite since we opened. He's my kind of guy. He's not picky about anything. He's happy with everything, he said. Especially since everything is really up to par. It's not his style to talk to the staff, but we know each other. His name is Norman. They have a small firm, office 1 floor below yours. They trade with the Koreans for some hardware and components. He's the technical director, deputy general manager. I can't tell you anything else. If you want my own opinion. Jason interrupted himself with a question addressed to Emily. Yeah, sure, go ahead, she said. He was adequate, calm, well-mannered, a man of his own mind. I'd say too much on his own. So smart, Emily laughed. She was getting ready to hear something important and not very pleasant. That weirdo Jason was, in her mother's words, and over his head. Norman, who had been a nameless stranger until recently, liked Emily more and more. All evening she pondered the most likely obstacle. He must be married. She had no experience with married men yet. But one thing she knew for sure: if a man was calm, well-mannered, and not poor, by the time he was 40 he would be married. Nothing can be done. If even divorced, then not for long. Just do not mess with married people. I remembered Mum's advice before she left, when she suddenly came to see Emily off at the station, even though she hadn't intended to. "What are we doing?" "I'm just going to get some mineral water," Mum said. And the two of them stayed on the platform. Emily smiled in surprise then. She's the one she's traveling with. Where did she get that idea? Had Mum guessed that their paths would quickly part in the big city? Emily still thought her mum was limited. Turns out her mum wasn't a simpleton either. The next day, Emily caught a cold and spent 3 days in bed in a rented flat. At least Kyle was out of the picture. He was running errands, getting to know the new band he hoped to play in, trying to become his own man. In the evenings, he'd tell Emily how he felt about his new acquaintances. She hardly pretended to listen. After all, she was sick, and it was hard for her to concentrate. Kyle had to understand that. When she arrived at work, Amanda greeted her with an enigmatic grin and immediately broke the news. "I went to your favorite cafe on Friday for a cup of coffee. It was really good. I'm having a cup of coffee at the counter, and then your Norman comes in, throws out all the tables, finds no one interesting, and it's obvious that he's thinking. And he asks the barman Friday night. It was Marcus. The girl who used to sit at the table by the pillar doesn't come here anymore. And I'm just casually making conversation. I'm a little sick. And your girlfriend? As her boss, I'm very sorry about that. I can tell her that you are too. Maybe she'll get better sooner that way. Her name is Emily, by the way." He smiled at me with a slightly restrained smile and said, "Yes, can you tell her table mates are already worried? Thank you very much." "That's it," my dear Amanda winked at Emily, very pleased with herself. Immediately she slipped a stack of freshly applied invoices under her nose. Emily liked to recall the details of her acquaintance with Norman. It was as if they had been missing a slight nudge towards each other, and Amanda's intervention had been that nudge. It was suddenly much simpler than that. As Emily was drinking her coffee at the usual time, Norman walked into the cafe and with an inviting smile went straight to her table. Getting to know a man had never gone so easily and smoothly for Emily. Never had things worked out so well from day one. Before she knew it, Norman had declared that their relationship had become an important part of his life. How? Amanda snorted ironically. The wheel of fate had turned. It seemed that this was a rare chance. All Emily had to do was take a little risk. She didn't hesitate for long. No matter how she looked at it, her relationship with Kyle was over. Going home wasn't an option. It'd be like signing off as a loser. That's all the jealousies and rivals waiting to happen. It's already a second-class life there. So Emily informed Kyle that she was moving out of the flat. Emily, Matthew began. I understand that you're tired. I understand that I promised you a bright future, and it turned out the way it did. But I wasn't lying. That's what I thought. Why don't you just calm down and wait a little longer? Things are just starting to come together now. Don't be cranky, please. Can you hear me just a little bit? Or just yourself? As always. Tiredly, with indifferent irritation, Emily asked, who said anything about whimsy? I took the first decent job I could find, and you're going through the motions. In case you haven't noticed, I've been paying for this flat for 2 months now, and you've got nothing. It's fine, Kyle frowned. I told you I was fine with it. You did, you didn't. What difference does it make? Emily interrupted him, bored with the conversation from the start. If you're doing well now, I have nothing to worry about. You'll be able to pay for this place on your own. I've found another cheaper place. I'll be fine on my own. Kyle couldn't believe she was serious about leaving. He was used to his Emily not being able to decide anything. She wasn't comfortable living on her own. Emily was a little hurt. It didn't even occur to him that she had found another man. Emily didn't lay the cards on the table. She just quietly threw her things into her suitcase, called a taxi and left. Norman rented her a studio. It was tiny, but cozy with everything she needed. The new studio was much nicer than Kyle's grandmother's dilapidated flat. Norman assured her the rent was low because the owner was a good mate of his. By the way, Emily wouldn't have to pay anything at all. Norman would be able to afford it on his own without breaking his budget. What else did Emily see in him? He immediately said that he was married, that all feelings have long since cooled, but there was no reason to divorce. He lived by inertia, as many people do. Emily was aware that all married lovers say approximately the same thing. But for some reason she stubbornly believed that her case was special. Why? Were there plenty of special cases too? We must think of something, she thought. To push Norman to the decision to divorce his wife and marry me. The task is difficult. One cannot act abruptly and rashly. You could spoil everything irreparably. And then Lady Luck smiled dazzlingly at Emily again. Norman's wife had filed for divorce herself, having learned of her husband's infidelity from somewhere. Norman was at first so amazed that he was confused by the surprise. He had told him before that it would be very difficult to get a divorce from his wife. And Emily believed it. Successful and accomplished men do not just let go. He told her that Evelyn's daughter was in college, only a sophomore, almost a child and very sensitive. There's no guarantee she'll take her parents' divorce lightly. So Norman and Emily would have to wait a little longer. And while Emily pondered how to encourage Norman to put his daughter on the back burner, his wife quickly decided everything without regard to feelings. Divorce. Norman's wife really did seem to have a nasty, principled character. She even left the flat straight away. "I don't need anything from you," Norman said, almost cheerful, beginning to believe in his freedom. "But it was for the best. Then I'll move in with you. We'll live together. You want that too, don't you?" "Of course, my love," Emily hastened to assure him. "Why pay extra money for my rented room? It's better to spend it together," Norman said. Amanda advised Emily to show Norman her understanding and support at all times. "Now would be a good time to show him what he would gain by marrying you," she said. "He must have no doubt that he needs it. My friend had a case when she was young. 5 years she waited until a married lover deigns to divorce. And he got divorced, and all delays with a new marriage, makes excuses. And one day my friend learns that he married another, some young girl. It's bad form to marry a mistress. What do you think? It happens. So if your Norman wants to live together, go for it. At least you'll be able to see it more often. Then you can see what he's like in the home." Norman didn't scare anyone in the home, and he had a good temper, not like Kyle, who justified his bouts of grumpy grumbling by saying he was a man of creativity. Emily silently praised herself. She was doing everything right. A more understanding, gentle, fun-loving friend than her could take years to find. She was so into the role that she even volunteered to accompany Norman to court for the divorce proceedings. "I can see you're nervous, darling," she said. "There's no shame in it. Anyone would be nervous. If I go with you, it's to make sure your ex doesn't want to pull a stunt. Her ego won't let her show her attitude in front of me. I know women like that. Just trust me." Norman didn't object, and the two of them drove to the courthouse together. Norman's wife, Patricia, was exactly as Emily had pictured her in her photographs. A thin, brown-haired woman with a cold smile. Absolutely nothing outstanding. She was too lazy to even get her hair and nails done. Patricia walked lazily past Norman and Emily. She grinned enigmatically and made a slight movement with her hand, as if weighing the thin file folder she carried with her. Someone must have joked that she had the smile of a Joconda. She'd believed it. Norman was overconfident in general. The trial was open to the public, but you don't get an audience at a trial like this. It's not criminal, it's too boring. So in the hall, which smelled of dust from the folds of heavy drapes and massive wardrobes, there was only the judge and the clerk, Norman and Emily, and Norman's soon-to-be ex-wife. Emily paid little heed to the judge's words. One could get confused if one tried to make sense of these legal terms. All that was clear was that the parties did not agree to reconciliation. Emily was about to fall asleep from the boring, bureaucratic language when she was suddenly stunned. "Patricia," the judge said, "can you provide the court with the documents, according to which the above-mentioned flat after the divorce should fully remain in your ownership?" "Yes, please, Your Honor," Patricia replied. She rose from her chair and with an easy gait, not fidgeting in the least, walked up to the judge and held out the same thin folder Emily had noticed her with when she met him. From the moment the judge took the papers in her hands to the moment she spoke again was an eternity. At least that's how it seemed to Emily. She cast a wary glance at her Norman's face and noticed that he seemed uncomfortable. He seemed to be hunched over, not even a little bit like the respectable man she had fallen in love with, and for whom she had left Kyle, for whom she had spent years without a second thought. Emily felt confused, even anxious. "Yes, you do own the flat," said the judge to Patricia, "but by your late mother and by you before the marriage. Did your husband participate financially in improving the living conditions, for example, by investing in renovations?" Norman even opened his mouth, preparing to say something without waiting for the judge to address him. But Patricia was the first to speak. "No, Your Honor, the flat has been renovated twice, and once even a legally approved alteration. But those expenses were paid for by my father," Jasper Patricia interjected. "He's a meticulous man. I'm sure he even kept receipts. I can show them to you if you need them. He hired the workmen, too. They're still in the same lineup, so they can confirm who paid them." "Thank you, Samantha," the judge nodded. "Norman, to the best of the court's knowledge, the flat where you and your wife lived is not your only residence." "Yes, Your Honor," Norman admitted sullenly. "I did not participate financially in the renovation of my wife's flat because I was saving money for my own property. I hope you realize that I didn't want to feel dependent because my wife came from a fairly well-to-do family. 5 years ago, I purchased a studio flat." "Isn't that the studio you supposedly rented for me?" Emily wanted to interrupt Norman with a question, but not in such an inappropriate place as the court. She would immediately demand from him to clarify the situation. So he was not the breadwinner in this family, but his wife's daddy. And Samantha herself did not look like a helpless young lady. "What a fool you are," Emily, she thought. I wondered how Samantha could have filed for divorce on her own. Anyone would have done it when they had nothing to lose but a philandering husband who'd traded their spouse for a young mistress. I wonder what Norman had in mind with me, that I would accept his true nature and continue to love him as he is. Well, he's a fool, honestly. Where do they get that from, that someone just wants them so much? So many questions were boiling in my head that I had no energy to pretend to be an affectionate kitty. But I couldn't make a spectacle of myself in the courtroom to the delight of that dry Samantha. "I have to go out," Emily whispered quietly to Norman. She got up from her chair, picked up her purse, and walked quietly along the wall toward the courtroom exit. Emily didn't realize she was outside. But it was hot. She could suffocate. She wanted cold water, not just to drink, but to pour on her head to cool off. She stood in the middle of the pavement for a few more minutes, and then quickly, almost jogged away from the courthouse. Samantha feared she would feel sorry for her husband's mistress. She didn't think all wives were saints and all mistresses unscrupulous. Life didn't work in such a primitive way. Tiffany gave her a portrait of a girl who could be sympathized with. She was out hunting and thought she had caught a firebird by the tail, but it was a goose. They were both deceived in their expectations. So it was in vain that Norman's mistress looked at her with such intense animosity in front of the courtroom. Now, do you think I've often seen women forgive their husbands for such adventures over time? And does life in the family really get better? Asked my father when he learned of the impending divorce. "No, Dad," Samantha smiled sadly. "You are not original in your opinion. It's not just an adventure. Adventures come in many forms. With Norman, it's not a random lapse of judgment or a vicious circle when a man loves his family and someone special to him. He lived with me out of convenience. It was convenient for him, a stable, fairly well-paid job with me, this flat, the opportunity to rest. He is not a fool, and he himself understands perfectly well that he jumped over 2 steps, having once become my husband. Yeah, I thought it was normal. And so did you. Thank you. But at least he could have had the decency to keep quiet about me and her. And he spent day after day telling her how cold, bossy, picky I was. Well, at least he'd lie something close to the truth." "Yes, indeed, that's low," agreed my father, raising his gray eyebrows and hastily hugging his Samantha. "I'd already said goodbye to Norman the day after you filed for divorce." Of course, Samantha didn't need to know about her father's joyful emotions. But at last he had an excuse to get rid of this careless son-in-law, whom he kept by his side only out of love for his daughter and an old-fashioned notion of paternal duty. Norman tried to remain calm, but he couldn't. "I understand your feelings," Jasper, he said pathetically but unconvincingly. But I'm sure you're an objective man who doesn't interfere with personal matters and work. If a new employer needs references from a previous job, will you be able to give them to me? Unfortunately, no, Norman Jasper said in a soft, confidential voice. I've mixed work and personal so much that I'm disgusted with myself. If I'd hired you off the street from a job advert years ago, we'd have worked for 6 months at the most, and then parted, if not out of mutual desire, then out of my own initiative. It wasn't personal. It's just that I wanted to start a family business, and I made a mistake. You stubbornly pretended not to notice my hints that your contribution to the business leaves much to be desired. Simply put, it was all on me. Do you have anything to object to? Norman silently acknowledged his point. Thank you for silently acknowledging my point, Jasper continued. Of course, I won't spoil your CV. You can write whatever you want on it, but recommending you to anyone is a bit much. No, I could recommend you to a competitor for a key position, but those gentlemen would consider it mockery. I'm all for civilized business. Jasper watched Norman frantically trying to hide his irritation and confusion. He did not consider himself a vindictive man, but now he was not at all ashamed of his pleasant feelings. It was only a pity that it would not help his daughter to get over her disappointment more quickly and easily. Emily piled her things from the emptied cupboard under her bed and chastised herself dejectedly. She could have guessed how this was going to end, back when she'd found out Norman had quit his job. Emily hadn't even considered what a wake-up call that was. Norman immediately let his guard down. She should have sat through the meeting instead of running away like a cowardly little fool. Surely she would have found out that her lover was working for his wife or her family. She wouldn't have been surprised at anything after the information about the flat. That's why it's bad luck. Why do you get the wrong people? It was too nice to be wishful thinking, so I got caught. You have to be thorough right away instead of hoping for luck. Apparently, Emily has a complicated relationship with luck. The main thing now was to pack everything, including presents, and slip out of the flat before Norman arrived. He's probably already thought of apologies and plausible excuses, and she might give in to weakness and forgive him. He's so imposing, and they in Cyprus would look on with envy. They're a handsome couple, not many of them, and she's really let herself fall in love without making sure it's safe. She had to run and decide where to go. Emily suddenly flinched. She fiddled with her things. She didn't have time. The key turned inevitably in the keyhole. Emily had time to assume the casual pose in which she had frozen. On the threshold of the room stood the landlady. Norman drove from the process so exhausted that even recalled their long-forgotten labor duty in his parents' vegetable garden planting and digging potatoes. After this process, the same dull fatigue reigned in the body. Yes, he came from the most ordinary family where food was grown in the vegetable garden. You'd think someone would be surprised by that. Yes, every other one of those smooth and sweet gentlemen who know how to dust women's eyes comes from such a family. And Emily's exactly like that herself. Although she pretends to be a carefree glamour girl, they're very much alike in reality, which is why they're so good together. The key is to convince Emily of that now. Losing what's left of her comfortable life and her lover in one day would be too much. He has to find the words to calm her down and convince her to move back to his studio. That wouldn't be hard. Right now she didn't even have a place to sleep anyway. You can't find a suitable rental property in a few hours. In fact, when you don't have connections, nothing gets done quickly. Norman was sure he'd find a suitable job in no time. In any case, by the appointed date of divorce proceedings did not come out. What was on offer was 25 hours a day for the money he was used to, and the amount and content of work he was used to was paid very modestly. Everyone wants to get a lot for a pittance. That's reality. He needs Emily now more than ever to keep him from falling into despair altogether. Once he got a decent job, it would be up to him to figure out how to move on. The door to the flat was closed but not locked. What carelessness, a girl so absent-minded she'd forgotten to lock herself in. Come out whoever you want, take whatever you want. And there's plenty of his stuff to get out before Samantha shows up. Well, at least it was a good thing Emily hadn't thought of disappearing, because women like her were theatrical. Suddenly there was giggling and female voices coming from the kitchen. Forgetting that he was about to take off his shoes, Norman entered the kitchen. The dining table was laden with vases of strawberries, candied fruit, and cakes. Above it all towered a bottle of champagne. Emily and Samantha were snuggled up at the table like old acquaintances. Hello, they said indifferently, without any gloating, and raised their glasses almost simultaneously when they saw Norman in the doorway. To us, the beautiful and wise. Do you recognize us? It was the only thing Norman could think of to ask. Why not? Samantha replied serenely. We are celebrating the day of getting rid of unnecessary ballast. The ballast being me, of course. Okay, you got it. The seed of the wronged woman. I get it. But what's your part in this celebration, pet? I remember telling you my ex-wife was a master at using people for her own ends. So you're very mistaken if you think she sympathizes with you. That's not a skill our Samantha has. She didn't even think to wait for me to pack up and move my stuff out of the flat, and she came here. Couldn't deny herself the pleasure of humiliating me one last time. Unfortunately for you, ex-darling, it doesn't affect me. I can see how it doesn't affect you, Samantha replied almost affably. Thank you for the pleasure. Emily, let's go pack. Norman switched to a businesslike tone, instantly deciding that it was wise to ignore Samantha for now. Emily didn't move from her seat. On the contrary, she sat down, took the largest strawberry from the vase and looked at Norman defiantly. I wonder on what grounds you are ordering me about. You haven't made me an official offer. An invitation to live together is not an offer. And after your lies, I consider myself a free girl. I've already packed my things. I'm talking to the landlady, we're having a nice chat, we understand each other. And you can go about your business. I have no complaints about you. Looking at Norman, Emily wrinkled her nose amusedly, as she did when she saw a spider or a frog. What, are you playing someone else's part? Norman said contemptuously. You were much better suited to your old role. You had some use for it, gifts, traveling. So you're wasting your time, Emily. Don't confuse yourself with Samantha. She's the one who's allowed to show off. She's the brave one. She's the designer because she'll never lose out on her daddy's collateral. You're the ex-girlfriend of a street musician who's going home to her village to count the wages of the forestry workers. You think I'd marry you? Who would marry someone like you? You've got the meter running in your eyes, you only want to get more at a man's expense. You only take advantage of men, and when they take advantage of you, you play innocent. If anyone has the right to accuse me of lying, it's certainly not you. Not even your guitarist will take you back now, Norman continued. I'm sure he's already found someone simpler, with no glamorous pretensions on the spot. Holy, selfless citizen. We've heard more than enough of your speech, Samantha interrupted Norman nonchalantly but loudly. Stay calm. Please collect your things. Samantha spoke to Norman like a boorish, prejudiced teenager. Emily sat silently, chewing strawberries with undisguised gusto and didn't look offended at all, though after all that was said she should have been. Norman imagined how humiliating it would be to rummage through the cupboards, pulling out his trousers and shirts to the giggles from the kitchen. So he simply walked out of the flat, tossing his keys to the floor and slamming the door. A grown man, Samantha snorted, likes all sorts of theatrical gestures. I'm sorry if my idea upset you. I didn't expect him to break up like that. After all, I still thought pretty well of him. I wasn't surprised, Emily said. People like him don't treat any of us with respect. No, I'm no saint myself. He's got a point about the meter. All right, even if he's completely right, but he lied to keep me in line. He's so respectable. I didn't lie to him. I honestly told him who I was, where I was from, what my situation was, and that I needed support and patronage, not paradise in a hut. He knew all that, and now he was offended for some reason. Emily shrugged, trying to keep up Samantha's nonchalance. Let's do me a favor, Samantha reminded her. Thank you, but not everyone would have agreed to stay until he arrived and act so unanimously female. I'd add that not everyone would offer that, Emily replied, taking the notes Samantha had placed neatly on the table. I was expecting a scandal when I saw you on the doorstep, preparing to fight back with suitcases. You're supposed to hate me. You have every right to. I'm sure Norman's told you I'm selfish. Samantha laughed. That's true, Samantha nodded. I love myself, so it would be a shame to waste my energy on hate. I'm even grateful to you for showing up at the right time. I would have gone on wasting my life on Norman and not known what kind of man he was. It's not even about the cheating. He's an evil clone. It's petty. I agree, and I'm happy to confirm it, Emily nodded. They looked at each other, realizing that they were in a sense like-minded. Their long journey of female solidarity had led them to this small personal celebration. Samantha no longer seemed like a flawless, proud woman, and Emily no longer seemed like a windy adventuress. More challenges might lie ahead, but for now, each retained a priceless dignity. My mum has to go to a sanatorium, and yours will still wait. But upon hearing his wife's reply, Caroline was eager to pack her suitcase. She is going to the sea in spring, when everything blooms there with sweet aromas. What happiness! And all her son Harry spoils her so much, always rushing to fulfill all her dreams. She only stammered that in her dreams she saw herself on the coast, among palm trees and magnolias. And he immediately promised. Sweetheart, you will not just go to this subtropical paradise, you will rest in the most luxurious health resorts. I promise. A couple of days later, Harry brought her a colorful catalog. She was not a friend of the internet. She liked to hold everything in her hands, to read, to understand. The computer seemed like an unknown electronic monster. Her life was beating here, in the colorful reality. What could be good in this universal fascination with social networks, messengers? She used the phone only for its intended purpose to talk, not to live in it 24 hours a day. Call, dialogue, disconnect, it's an invention of mankind, because that's what it was designed for. Caroline twirled in her hands a sundress on thin straps. No, the hot season is not yet suitable for such open clothes. And then it's not clear that ladies over 60 wear such outfits. She couldn't stand it when women of her age were referred to by the term elderly. In her mind, elderly and old were synonyms. She did not consider herself as such. She knew the axiom: an active, easy on the rise, fiery person of her type cannot be considered old. However, on the other hand, the definition of old is about someone who has lived a lot in this world. And she, if we take her events and adventures, had lived a lot. In order to understand how a person rushed to such a life at all speeds, the origins should be sought in his childhood and adolescence. Here she was born into a prosperous family of 2 intellectuals. To the marrow of her bones, she was a late, almost accidental child. Looking at her almost 50-year-old father, and you would not think that he looked at his wife at night to look at his wife as still very much like. Will he break away from the pile of books and sources when writing a monograph? Will go to his daughter, his wife, at night to kiss? He would stay like that till morning. They got married after 40. He was all about science, not Cupid and Cupid. Lillian was around gentlemen with oddities but enlightened minds. She served as an archivist in a scientific repository before their dates. Calvin and his beloved had been going at it for 2 years, unable to sort out their feelings. Normal people have a sweet and flirtatious period in their relationships. With them, it's more like a book, an exhibition period. He was developing his theories out loud. She played the role of an appreciative listener, understanding almost nothing about what the Chevalier was saying. What love is there? It would take a man away from the library dust and take him out into the fresh air. And the daughter herself could well be suspected of Peter Pan syndrome. A grown-up auntie is falling into childhood. Infantilization is seriously infected. They were such a strange couple. Why would they have children? They should have worked out how the child came into the world, but heaven had mercy on them. Lillian and Calvin had been married a couple of years. Little changed their former habits. They relatively normalized the household, learned to cope with household chores. Then a late pregnancy came to the woman. Her daughter was born the complete opposite. From a small age, she was actively interested in everything in the world in kindergarten. The leader of the Little Redskins, in all the games at school, and the initiator of every youthful mischief, a tomboy in a skirt, which could not offend either parents, nor friends, nor educators, nor teachers. A walking charm, a classic Barbie with a doll's appearance, a fairy tale princess. You look at her and do not even know how in such a lovely creature settled the character of militant Amazon. You choose your fate, your role with her and next to her, whether in her charm to drown, or once again marvel that such a miracle was born in a quiet and inconspicuous family. No idea what it is to ignite fans and lead them to any interesting adventure. Needless to say that suitors' nights, sighs, or crowds near her has always been a lot. There are such girls, for the sake of favor of which young men, and then adult men will go for everything. They'd be honored. Talent to conjure up other people's hearts was not the only virtue of Caroline. She was also able to go through life easily, by the way, without any help. She studied playfully, but did not show any zeal for it. At home, she did every task perfectly. Cooked deliciously, cleaned perfectly, washed and ironed, with one caveat: if she had the will to do so. In her hands, everything argued, but she did it all somehow, by the way, without putting her soul, without touching any strings in the cold heart. One drawback, which the girl did not expose to the public, she still had. She could not and did not want to love anyone. Adoration of parents took for granted. Admiring glances of representatives of the stronger sex either ignored or smiled condescendingly. No first crushes and trembling, sleeplessness about natural sympathy for someone. It seems that the American classic Theodore Dreiser wrote in one of his works that there are people on our planet on whose heart no events can leave even a scratch. Caroline was just such a person. That, however, did not prevent her from being the leader of any local society, from the yard to the student. Divide, conquer, and use, promising nothing to anyone. There was also a means of expressing complete and intense indifference to what was going on around her. Considering that she liked to be the center of the universe and always pulled every blanket to her side, she did not plan to fall from Olympus. But then a newcomer about 5 years older than the rest of the guys on the course appeared on the university course, where Caroline pretended that she was diligently studying economics. Rumor had it that the ex-military man had done his international duty. Tall, statuesque, with indifferent, piercing brown eyes. Cold as an iceberg in the Arctic Ocean. He didn't even think of joining Caroline's entourage, as if he didn't notice her at all. A month after David's appearance at the university, the number of subjects in the personal kingdom of the dream girl had noticeably decreased. Girlfriends melted from his masculine brutality. Guys wanted to be like him in everything. It came to the point that almost no one came to the carnival party in the dormitory on New Year's Eve, which Caroline had invented. David dragged the group into the woods with an overnight stay in tents, in the snow with campfires until almost morning. Everyone returned home thoughtful, as if they had become a bit more grown up. They told with delight about how they roasted boiled sausage on fire, baked potatoes in smoldering coals, and that it was 1,000 times tastier than champagne, tangerines, and chocolates. Closer to the earth, the sky and the stars, closer to something real and painfully familiar. Caroline, true to her traditional ideas in entertainment, their excitement around David's idea was not understood. She couldn't figure out how she was going to alienate the fans from the new kid at all. Angry, she even shouted at her friend Margaret for the first time. "I don't know what you all see in him." Following him around, looking in his mouth. "It's disgusting." Margaret, who had always been obedient, suddenly fought back. "I fell so in love with him that I would go to the ends of the earth. I wanted to follow him to a tent in the snow under the stars. If you fall in love, then we'll talk, Snow Queen. You can't understand me and others. Do you really know how to love?" I'm beginning to doubt it more and more. That's the first time she's ever heard such an accusation. It was not to say that she had been shaken out from under her feet by the words of her loyal friend, but it was extremely unpleasant to be accused of callousness and coldness. She wouldn't call her attitude toward David cold. The guy annoyed the hell out of her. He evoked not admiration, but an incomprehensible anger, something treacherous. She wanted to scratch his face to get rid of the perpetual smirk that appeared when she turned on her prima donna ways. And there can't be two leaders in a course. One of them has to yield to the other, that palm of popularity among fellow students. Caroline is not used to second roles. In her opinion, it was David who had to step into the shadows. But the worst thing was that her rival didn't even seem to realize that there was an unspoken competition between them for the title of the best pack leader. At the winter session, the passion subsided. Everyone diligently passed credits and exams. During the holidays, the whole group decided to go to winter sports camp. Snow, frost, skates on a frozen pond, skis on forest trails, sledges with smooth, low slides. Beauty, you can't think of a better leisure while you are young. The girl was very surprised that David went on holiday with the others. The duty in the wooden huts, where everyone slept, was set according to the schedule in the rooms, according to the principal, girls separately, boys separately. While everyone was out for a walk, someone alone stayed in each hut on the first floor to heat the cooker and prepare a simple lunch and dinner in the improvised kitchen. Caroline would smile at the memory. That small room witnessed the most important novel in her life, hot, dizzy, and unique. That day, David and Caroline were on duty at the camp at the same time. She always managed with household chores at once. Having assessed the available food supplies, she made a complicated dish for dinner. Borscht for young ladies is the very first thing that cannot be cooked from scratch. In the district culinary arsenal, he was an undoubted star. Products for the ideal version were not all available: cabbage only sour. Instead of raw carrots and juicy beetroot, only stewed beef and pork in cans. But it's nothing. An hour later, the aromas wafted through the wooden log cabin, and David thought he was in a fairy tale. He had never dreamed of such domestic perfection in his dormitory. Caroline didn't stop at borscht. She was already preparing pilaf with the same stew. When the smells of the two dishes mingled, David realized that he was giving up. Let this person become the queen of the course again, but at the same time she would treat him first with her delicious dishes. David was not in the habit of knocking on the door of the maiden's domain, so he went in as if it were his own home. At that moment, Caroline was trying to put a large pot of pilaf into the cooker. He was surprised at the contrast that opened up before him. The supposedly poor girl was wielding the kitchen equipment like a master chef. She was very pretty, flushed, satisfied, either with a poker or with a ladle in her delicate female hands. She raised her eyes at him, and in them a piercing blue ice, and sneered through her teeth. What kind of people have come to a woman's house, and to what do you owe such a high guest? His eyes slid to her lips, and he took a few steps towards her and kissed her. And it seemed that at that moment she forgot how to breathe. So delightful was the sensation. David didn't stop there. She didn't resist, completely submitting to his will like an obedient woman who had lost control of herself. The rest happened for her as if in a fog. A little later, David quickly, and in time, helped her to clean herself up. Downstairs in the house, the voices of students returning from their walk could already be heard. Looking into the room, Margaret, Caroline's friend who was in love with him, was greeted by David with words. "We're having a feast for the world tonight. I've boiled potatoes and got a whole pot of pickles from a local granny for everyone. And our beautiful Caroline will feed you with borscht and pilaf. Run and call the boys to the table, and we'll set out plates and spoons." Margaret opened her mouth in amazement. It was their idol who was saying all this now. David called Caroline beautiful and praised her cooking. They were almost secret enemies. Caroline stands there silently, not saying a word. What were they doing here while everyone else was skiing and sledging? Startled by her discovery, Margaret rushed downstairs to call her fellow students for dinner. Caroline and David were silent, not looking at each other until he muttered, "Sorry, I couldn't help myself. I didn't think I'd be your first. I got the impression that although you study well, you're a frivolous, giddy girl by nature. If you don't mind, we'll go out. I'm not going to hide from you in the bushes." Footsteps were already heard on the stairs, so Caroline said only 2 words. "Time will tell." Caroline returned home in a state of confusion. In her heart, she still had no tender feelings for David. Her heart was silent, but her body reacted violently. She began to dream about David at night. "I didn't expect myself to react this way to what happened in the wooden cabin," she thought. Caroline did not yet understand the intricacies of her natural sensuality. The only thing that was clear was that she would agree to go on a date with David. Not a moonlit walk with sighs, but to be really close, to drown in his arms and forget everything in the world. David couldn't forget that day either, swearing to himself. "David, you're not a green boy anymore. Why did you fall for her the first time? You've had so many other women, and you can't forget her. Well, go out with her again. Spend some time alone. Maybe she'll let you go." After that winter holiday, they both drowned in the affair as in a dark pool. They had practically nothing to talk to each other about, but in the other, it was as if every time they flew to another universe, then they realized where they were, at classes. They marveled at themselves. They would be apart for half an hour, and then they would be attracted to each other again. Both of them remembered little how the pre-graduation internship had gone. They received diplomas stating that they were now certified economists. They never discussed their future together, never made plans for a family and children. These 3 years together flew by like one day. And then their fever went out as lightning fast as it had flared up during the next meeting. Both suddenly felt that the desire melted, evaporated. They looked at their partner with bewilderment, wondering what could bind them so tightly. They did not agree on the next date. David was going to the capital, where he was called to work by a comrade in arms. Caroline intended to stay in her hometown. Her parents increasingly worried her. The house was now entirely on her alone. The rest of Caroline's life was an endless succession of husbands and lovers. Usually all these men worshipped their doll, and she only favorably allowed herself to love, accepting gifts and offerings. Really rich companions, such that could pamper the beloved woman. Real estate, jewelry, treasures, trips to resorts, somehow did not happen. But Caroline's second husband marked another surprise. Harry was born, which could hardly be called a long-awaited child. At first, Caroline looked at the future baby as a miracle. The maternal instinct did not want to wake up. At that time, Caroline's husband had no money for an experienced nanny. Grandpa Calvin and Grandma Lillian were in such a state that they needed to be looked after. Parents of the husband lived on the other side of the world. Enthusiasm to go and help his daughter-in-law with the baby did not show enthusiasm. The situation was saved by Caroline's ability to adapt to any circumstances. Eyes fear, but hands do. After watching the newborn for a few days, she rolled up her sleeves and rushed, as usual, into a new battle with difficulties. A couple of months later, in the courtyard of the apartment building where their family lived, the neighbors watched with delight the well-groomed baby Harry in a blue pram. She coped, except that her infantile husband sent out the door. The use of him in the matter of raising a child was no good. Why waste time on such a man? Since then, Caroline has been in another inexpensive official marriage. The experience was again unsuccessful. It turned out that the craving for strong drinks in Carolina's handsome husband was much greater than the craving for a prosperous marriage. The woman stopped experimenting with marriage altogether. By the age of 40, her son Harry was already a teenager. Successfully studying at school was a source of joy for her. Why should everyone around her know that her heart was silent again? Being a successful mom and raising a beautiful child was somewhat prestigious and worthy for her. Everything like people, everything as it should be in society. Adult Barbie was still not deprived of male attention. Men helped a lonely woman with a child in any way they could. To pamper such a brave woman was considered a good deed. This is how Caroline lived the next 20 years, surrounded by admirers and devoted love from Harry. Her son upset her only once, when he chose as his wife a girl who did not fit Caroline's standards. She usually stayed out of her son's affairs. He graduated from school with a silver medal, the institute without a single mark, in the credit card only good and excellent marks. His appearance and mind were flawless. He immediately found a good job. Mother willingly helped with all domestic problems. And then, suddenly, quite ordinary modest girl Catherine and her mother, obsessed with books. In their house, books were everywhere. The shelves were bursting with them. They weren't weird. They were enthusiastic and very kind people. Miranda and her daughter Catherine had no greater happiness in their lives than to read another book, to experience the thrill of immersing themselves in it. Those who would call them book lovers would surely be right. But their sacred love of books was not limited to reading. They wrote their own paperworks. Both of them, Miranda and Catherine, were also involved in book restoration. Catherine had no choice but to follow in her mother's footsteps to the Library Institute after high school. Miranda couldn't remember, perhaps, when she had learned to read. It seemed that it was from birth, although it does not happen that way. Her parents' struggle with Miranda not to read books so much from childhood was doomed to failure. Miranda would not part with a book even in her sleep, falling asleep sweetly only when the tome was hidden under her pillow. She convinced herself that such a ritual would allow her to find out in her sleep how everything would end. She obtained books wherever she encountered them, but the beginning was at home, where her parents and grandparents had amassed huge libraries before her. Later, when Miranda answered in literature or history classes at school, her classmates would listen to her and the teachers would open their mouths in amazement. Her extensive vocabulary made her speech beautiful, smooth, and amazingly interesting. Even about dry historical facts she could tell so vividly that one wanted to listen to her and listen to her. Sometimes teachers, having forgotten, announced enough, it's time to move on to the study of new material. Sit down, 5. Miranda had no priorities in her choice of books. She read whatever came to hand. Did she have a preference among authors? She would have found it difficult to answer. Book pages seemed to her not just a collection of words, letters, and phrases, but paintings by artists, compositions by musicians, sculptures. She always carried a thick, tattered notebook in which she wrote out her favorite expressions, as if she were knitting patterns in the pockets of a wide jumper. The combination of words seemed to Miranda an incomprehensible magic, and their meaning a wise science. Needless to say, the girl was a dreamer. She did not squander reading love novels of all genres. She imagined herself in a fairy tale next to a prince on a horse, and next to a handsome young man on a fast car or a boat with sails. Girls' dreams can be very colorful. In the crowd of male peers, Miranda did not look for a suitable candidate, but she discreetly looked out for guys. When nature reminded her that it was time for love, Miranda was no exception. And most importantly, boys looked at her, if not with adoration, as they did at the older, perky girls, then with obvious respect. She had an interesting gift for conversation, a way of talking about almost anything. The girl's words were incredibly small, like a life-giving sip that made the world more beautiful. All the boys, without exception, wanted to drop everything and follow her wherever she went, as in the Middle Ages, rats followed the sound of the Pied Piper's whistle. The bad news was that once Miranda stopped talking, the magic dissipated. The boys would immediately start looking for a reason, lose interest, and rush about their business. Sebastian was the only one who remained his idol's loyal knight Pallas, never cheating on Miranda under any circumstances. He was ready to be by her side even when she was silent for a long time. The reason was valid. The young man had recognized a secret trait in his beloved. When Miranda passionately shared something with her listeners, a golden glow of happiness appeared in her eyes, so sincere and all-consuming that it made him dizzy. Sebastian was head over heels in love with the girl, but she considered him only her devoted friend. What kind of fiancé would he be if she was already a student, and he was only in his senior year of high school? Like all girls her age, she was attracted to older guys. The laws of choice are always harsh, and he had no place in the ranks of older student suitors. Sebastian was a stubborn kid. While Miranda diligently studied librarianship, and then read night after night the novelties which more and more published, the guy graduated from school, entered the missile school in another city. He had always been attracted to the military profession. He dreamed that he would get married and take his beloved to a distant garrison, load a whole container of books with him. She would select interesting works to raise the cultural level of his comrades and cook him delicious porridge. Years from now, there will be children's voices in their house, a boy and a girl, that's for sure. And maybe, God willing, there will be even more children. He would be glad if his beloved waited for him. Miranda didn't. She managed to fall in love with the most unsuitable candidate in her environment, the athlete Terence. He studied at the Institute, in addition to his victories in the ring. The girl a book fairy and a stout with a slightly silly expression on his face, the same couple. But that contrast didn't embarrass Miranda in the least. He could listen to her stories for hours with his mouth open, walking with her around the city, and expressed his admiration for her so clearly and faithfully, as if he saw in her, if not a true goddess of the mind, then exactly her earthly copy. Miranda's memory was excellent. She remembered the content of many fantastic books, and detectives managed not to confuse their plots, and he listened. Terence would run and fret, covering the bench with her t-shirt if it seemed dirty, helping her put on her favorite shoes as if she were infirm and weak enough to tie the laces on her boots. He wouldn't let Miranda go even for a second, but life wasn't just about their meetings. He had to put up with short separations of a few hours. Miranda was in her final year of high school. Terence was 2 years behind. His university coach had praised the boy after several high-profile victories at various competitions. He decided to ensure his future higher education would not be superfluous. Nobody wanted to openly criticize the boy. He has been long and hard engaged in a tough sport since middle school. Frequent trips to training camps and competitions did not allow him to study science and sit behind textbooks. And no one in his family encouraged him to develop mentally. His father, older brother. Everyone told him that he would earn much more with his fists than with his brains. He had a certificate with all C's obtained with difficulty. Let's go, bro. To new sporting victories, no doubt about it. Miranda Terence was caught by Cupid's insidious arrow at a student conference. The girl was giving a long report. The guy was in the auditorium from boredom. When slender, collected, ready to strike the imagination of the audience, Miranda rose to the podium. She read her material on a piece of paper for only a couple of minutes, and then, like discharges, her words ran through the rows. She transformed herself, began to improvise. Instantly, it became very quiet. If a fly had flown into the room at that moment, it would have been heard flying through the air. Terence was taken aback, engaged in the topic, interested. After the conference, he approached the girl, insisted on walking her home. All the way to her house, Miranda again said something to Terence in her pleasant, a little hoarse voice after a long report, and he listened and wondered why this student, another one without a constant companion, asked so bluntly. "Do you have a boyfriend?" She wondered. "Why do you ask? Isn't it obvious that beauty alone shines, and talent of an orator is not a quality that can keep a young man around for a long time? I have known everything about myself for a long time. I am a girl, a friend, a comrade, and a sister to my fellow students. They usually ask other girls out on dates." Terence insisted, coming under the impression of her words. "Forget these delusions. They don't know your true worth. You're a real treasure, nor do you know the value of yourself." That long monologue made Terence sweat. All his relationships with the fairer sex had been short-lived. Take a friend to a bar, drop in on her for a cup of coffee, and if the coffee was good, repeat the ritual a couple or three more times. Next, the change of the guard of honor at his feet. To turn his gaze to a new admirer, a whole battle in the ring. To become for her brutal macho, attractive, such as always been not a few in the female environment. Terence was never without his girlfriends for the night. He wanted to carry Miranda in his arms, to protect her from all harm. He wouldn't even think of kissing her now, though he wanted to. But the girl, as it turned out, was full of surprises. She quite shamelessly rose on tiptoe, looked into his eyes and said, "You're interesting. You're so big and strong. I'm not a weak girl, but we can be friends." "Life is not a fairy tale," she said, punctuating her words with a light kiss on Terence's lips. The young man, experienced in lovemaking, was in heaven at that gesture. He had not expected such a reaction from himself. Suddenly he blushed and asked Miranda, embarrassed, "Tomorrow after class, shall we go to the cinema, or would you rather go for a walk?" "In this weather, we should only go for a walk in the fresh air," was her reply. Miranda pulled the doorknob of the driveway door and disappeared into the darkness. Terence stood outside her house for another 5 minutes, wondering. What was that? Since that wonderful evening, Terence and Miranda had spent almost all their free time together. She had stopped answering Sebastian's letters, which she did not consider a grave sin. Undoubtedly, a military cadet was no longer a snotty high school student. It was the other thing. Her heart was completely occupied by Clumsy, sometimes funny in his impulses, but very devoted to Miranda Terence. It was even hard to say which of the two boys loved her more. The key was that she preferred the kind boxer with strong fists and a warm heart. As for Terence himself, he was afraid to touch Miranda lest he offend her feelings. Seeing such his timidity, the girl after a while took the initiative in her own hands, and then from her courage the cavalier allowed himself long, tender kisses, but did not go further, could not overpower his shyness. In this secret fear, one natural modesty. After the graduation party in honor of Miranda's diploma, she stayed the night at Terence's dormitory. What was supposed to happen between two people who love each other? They became close. The transition into a new stage of their relationship didn't change them in the slightest. Miranda soon enough found a job in her field of speciality, and still from morning till evening revolved around her favorite books. Terence was traveling around the next competition, going through a hard separation. No one would have thought that in his steel chest, under the powerful muscles, hides a trembling heart. The next summer, when the young man had only a year left to study, they were married. In the book collections gathered in the flat of Miranda's parents, the newlyweds had no place to stay. But then, just as a way out of the situation came up, the coach whispered to Terence that serious people are interested in him. They want to try him in competitions for good money, so that Miranda could live with him, not in a miserable dorm room. He agreed without a moment's hesitation. There's an expression, life can be scarier than fiction. In order not to go into a long description of further events, we can only outline the chronology. Terence's participation in betting games was successful. There went the crazy money, fame, fans, envious people, the intrigues of competitors. Miranda was pregnant at the time. She was forced to stay in labor and delivery because of the toxicosis. Didn't keep track. Your husband is a hare, getting deeper and deeper into other people's business, she was told. The country in general was in disarray. The country was beginning to resemble an unstable structure. Political foundations were about to collapse, ardent ideas to fall into oblivion. The regulatory authorities had little interest in the dirty little dealings of merchants who made money out of entertainment. Terence never gave himself a rest. He was in the ring again and again. "My love, while I am the favorite in the ring, I need to make money, and you lie quietly in the hospital, chew oranges to avoid nausea," he said to Miranda. She loved him very much, obeyed him in everything, and the fact that the man became sometimes unaccountably dizzy, he was drenched in sweat, pale, she did not notice and did not understand anything about it. The result was predictable. A blood clot in his heart broke off right in the ring. Death was instant, tragic, and quick. At that time, doctors barely managed to save Miranda's pregnancy, so intense was her grief. She couldn't believe that a young, sturdy as an oak tree guy could pass away from a heart condition. Thought the employers were hiding something. She only calmed down when a kind-hearted investigator took pity on her and showed her the official results of Terence's autopsy. The club where it had happened had been quietly shut down. Miranda was sure that it had only changed its location, but she couldn't fight them. Catherine, after all the excitement, had been born sickly and weak. Miranda's parents were barely making ends meet. Now they were forced to take in both their daughter and their tiny granddaughter. History repeated itself. Catherine, too, grew up with books, falling asleep to fairy tales and waking up to uplifting, positive nursery rhymes. Sebastian, who came from a distant garrison on holiday, could not persuade Miranda to marry him. She remained faithful to Terence for the rest of her life. At least Catherine never saw another man in the house other than her grandfather. Whatever misfortunes come upon us, time heals. Having sent her daughter to kindergarten, Miranda, all her insufficient love, spilled out on her brainchild, a reading room in the district library. Even in the neighborhood there were legends and jokes about her. "Your child does not like to read? Take him to Miranda's themed literary sessions. In a month, your entire salary will be spent on new books for your offspring." Since the first year of school, Catherine has known no greater pleasure than to rush to her mother at work to witness the next exciting event. She took the most enthusiastic part in the next redecoration of the hall, then in honor of the anniversary of some writer, then for the annual holidays, quizzes, competitions. The same thing that happened to her mother happened to the girl quite quickly. It was not even clear whether it was passed on with genes or a lot of books influenced a person in a similar way. In the first grade, Catherine's word-per-minute reading speed was already a record. In the 5th grade, she won the school Olympiad as the most heartfelt recitation of poems by classical poets. Miranda's parents were with them for a short time. They were old age. They left one after another quietly, calmly, without causing anyone unnecessary trouble. Mother and daughter were now left alone in the center of the treasure trove of books. And the volumes and volumes of impressive size occupied all the space in the flat, but mother and daughter were only glad of it. There is an ironic expression, bookworm. Miranda and Catherine were the ultimate bookworms, but in the best sense of the word. With their light hand, other people were learning to love this book world. There were new regulars in the reading room. So Miranda had won a new victory over someone else's idle pastime, and their example was a lesson to others behind reading and constant learning. It didn't take long for the years to pass. From an angular teenager, Catherine grew into a pretty girl with enthusiastic eyes and a kind disposition. The gift of her mother to mesmerize her stories, she did not adopt, but she studied very diligently, was a good mate for classmates, and the champion of elegant writing essays on literature in the Library Institute. After school, she quickly became a student. These years were like any other strict sessions, a little boring seminars, trips to the forest with tents, incendiary discos on holidays. She was more friends with the male sex than making eyes at them. Until she met Harry in the same library at her mother's, where he had come to turn in some scientific book. This guy stood out sharply from the crowd of regular customers of the reading establishment. Catherine, who was replacing her mother at the counter, was even a little taken aback, so good was the young man. The way he looked and the book he was reading at the table were a complete contrast. It was as if a dashing cowboy in full armor had been launched into the quiet literary world. Harry had never been stupid. He recognized the surprise in the girl's eyes and laughed. "Surprised by my choice? I'm shocked myself," he said. "But the boss at work gave me some delicate assignments, and I couldn't have done it without this monograph." The guy got acquainted with girls of various kinds easily and simply collected his male victories, not stopping at anyone for a long time. The most interesting thing was that having passed into the category of the former, Harry's girls did not hold a grudge. Too attractive, he knew how to organize romances beautifully. They had something to remember without suffering, especially since he had never promised anyone a big and bright love for life. They spent a bright time parted. And now the eternal lover cast an appraising glance at Catherine's slender figure, looked with a special look in her eyes, squared his shoulders, switched on a smile, and rushed into an exciting battle. "And what do you, young lady, prefer to read before going to bed? Something romantic? How about a bet to see which of us is more experienced?" He grinned. Catherine, instantly in her element, replied mockingly, "You should not even try to compete with me in this field. You will lose in no time, dear reader. I have no equal in this field." Harry immediately pretended to be amazed and frightened. "I've met a tough opponent, and I'm not used to losing," he laughed. They both laughed. The awkwardness that had lingered between them disappeared. The guy had orientated himself with lightning speed. "And let's go somewhere interesting after your work today. What do you prefer, to sit with a fun company in a bar, go to the cinema or theater? Just drive around the city?" Catherine answered honestly, "None of the above. I like to be at home. Amongst the many books, they are for me the bar, the cinema, and the delights of the streets." Harry deftly changed the mask of a frivolous young man into that of a wise old man. "Don't think me intrusive and impudent. Just take me with you to your book kingdom. At home, we don't have a lot of books on the shelves. I've always wanted to see an extensive home library. To see a house where books live," Harry said. His request made Catherine a little embarrassed, but she got over her thoughts and feelings quickly. "No problem. Mum and I had other plans for tonight, but tomorrow is tomorrow. I'll write you our address now. You owe me a cake. We owe you a cozy journey into the world of books. I hope you don't mind buying sweets for tea?" Harry was taken aback. This almost unknown girl so easily invites a stranger to her house. How naive and direct, almost adventurous. Some flame of excitement lit up inside him. Now he had no doubt that he would continue this acquaintance. Catherine saw nothing wrong in her invitation. She was completely charmed by her new acquaintance, and she was somehow sure that he would never do her anything wrong, would not act reprehensible. Time showed that she was not mistaken. With Harry there was the same mishap, which is usually said, "And on the old woman there is bad luck." Famous heartbreaker got a tough nut, but not in the sense that Catherine became for him an impregnable fortress. In relations with women, everything is much simpler. It was the first time he really fell in love. He didn't want to conquer, he wanted to spoil. Before that in his life, there was only one woman for whom he was ready to become a slave, a servant, or a support, his mother. Caroline was his absolute idol. She herself raised him, she herself gave him an education, she herself taught him wisdom. And, to give credit, always did it wisely and unobtrusively. He saw his future wife as an absolute copy of his mother. He assumed that a real woman always becomes for a man, if not a goddess, then at least his queen. Her wish is law, the fulfillment of her dreams is duty and joy. Do not jump to conclusions that Harry grew up mama's boy. It is not quite so. In matters of choice of friends, girls, entertainment, he did not think to ask his mother for advice. Harry's life unfolded as he pleased. His hard work was in a different direction. If Caroline suddenly needed anything, he would go out of his way to fulfill her every whim. If his mother did not have enough money for something, and she wanted it, Harry could even take on the job of unloading and loading wagons at the railway station at night. It was a far cry from his profession as a lawyer, but he built up a successful career slowly. He did not reach great heights in this field, contented himself with the position of a small clerk in a law office with the prospect of eventually growing from an assistant lawyer to an active, well-paid lawyer. The news that Harry was going to marry a book girl, as Caroline immediately dubbed her future daughter-in-law, shocked the future mother-in-law. She was well aware that sooner or later her son will want to start a family. But such a choice, this is absurd, a mistake, a delusion. However, all her exhortations were in vain. After the first visit to the bookhouse, Harry was smitten, subdued, happy. Everything with him and Catherine was like a written script. They met, fell in love, married. Wedding played a modest. 5 years later, they became the parents of 2 babies. Even to live, Harry moved to the kingdom of books. The whole atmosphere here was somehow out of place, a little far-fetched, but infinitely cozy. It was a place everyone wanted to come back to. Caroline was not exactly defeated, but rather neutralized in her ambitions. This period coincided with another stormy affair in her life. Her son and daughter-in-law were let loose, for the time being, of course. Miranda's life was not without news. There is such an opinion, seemingly verified by the experience of many generations, that the first love does not rust. The husband of the glorious woman left early, and she was faithful to his memory all the time. Not a step, neither to the left nor to the right. But the same Sebastian never forgot her. Having served his time in distant garrisons, having also buried his wife, the man returned to his hometown. Sebastian decided to look for his Caroline, as he just happened to attend a literary evening in her library. He listened to the woman, captivated by her stories, mesmerized. He sighed heavily and realized that he and his wife had lived a friendly life. They raised their children, waited for their grandchildren, and all this time the former feeling was slumbering in their souls. Hearing the sounds of the magic voice, Sebastian tensed up, forgetting everything in the world. It was as if a light had been switched on inside him again. He didn't dare approach Miranda that day, because she had turned him down so many times. He didn't want to dampen his mood right away. Miranda herself didn't care about anyone or anything. She had recently learnt that she was ill, and the diagnosis was worse than ever: oncology. The doctors were reassuring. "Why are you so sad? In your case, it is still quite possible to do surgery, completely cured. True, in our city there is no one to take on your case, but in the capitals, be it Washington or New York, such surgical interventions are already put on the stream." Miranda immediately asked, "This operation is paid?" The doctor readily explained, "There are different options. If you get in the queue for a quota, pass a full examination competently and quickly, get the appropriate referral, you can do without money. Perhaps you will have time for everything. I would not take such a risk. It is not known how your organism will behave, how malignant cells will multiply and grow. The paid version of the surgery is a more hopeful prospect." Stunned by her diagnosis, the woman waved her hands. "But such surgeries, hospital stays, probably cost a lot of money?" To which the doctor replied gravely, "Not more expensive than life, my dear. These are not sums that could not be collected if a person works. Payment in full is made through the cashier's office on a firm price list. You can find out all the details on the official website of the hospital if you choose that option." Miranda returned home, all doubtful. Harry and Catherine aren't rich. Even with her salary as a librarian, it would take months to pay for the trip. Her mind raced with thoughts. To tell or not to tell the children. She wasn't Caroline to demand fulfillment at any cost, and their children weren't goldfish. Miranda had only recently stopped marveling at the fact that Harry and Catherine were still together, loving their children and their mothers. Bringing the representatives of 2 such different worlds together is akin to doom, to failure. Caroline, in the rare moments when they did meet Miranda at their grandchildren's birthdays, said that Miranda had her quirks, but she was not in the clouds. She had everything going right in her life, something to envy. So they remained each with their own views on life and their own opinions. Fortunately, it was not necessary to cross paths often. They exchanged pleasantries and then parted again for a long time. Miranda could not keep the news of her illness inside her for long. A couple of days after the visit to the doctor, she told her daughter everything, taking her word that she would not say anything to Harry for the time being. Well, husband and wife won Satan. She spent almost the whole night from side to side. Catherine couldn't stand it, so she woke David up. She just blurted it out to him in one fell swoop. "I'm going to save Mummy at any cost. We'll check the Washington or New York clinic website tomorrow. New York is closer to us, but we'll choose the one that's willing to take care of Mummy's problem without delay." Until morning, David stroked his wife's sobbing shoulders and whispered in her ear, "Calm down, darling. We've saved up some money for the holiday. I have to get a bonus from the chief. I realize it's not enough, but we'll think of something else. Trust me, my dear, everything will work out." A day later, Catherine had already called all the clinics that performed this type of surgery. The price in them turned out to be similar, not small. But she was assured everywhere sent the results of analyses, albeit still preliminary, were encouraging. Miranda was given a fortnight to pack, prepare, and put everything in order. Her daughter confided to her that Harry was already aware of the upcoming operation. Harry fully supported Catherine's decision to be with her mum for as long as it took. Miranda went to work. Strangely enough, her fears and doubts kept her going. Does she have the right to burden her daughter and son-in-law with expenses? Will they not be able to go on holiday with the children this summer? What a shame. Where does shame? Where do all these diseases come from? Dividing a person's life into a time of ignorance, an illness, and a time after recognition. Terrible news. How many thoughts immediately come to mind? What if the operation does not work? What if the children's money will be wasted? She made her way home with slow steps and a heavy heart. Darkness and emptiness, how uncomfortable it all felt. Harry was about to have a difficult conversation with his mother about the indefinite postponement of the seaside trip to the sanatorium. He had never yet refused her whims. He didn't steal money for them from the family, so to speak. He sometimes withheld additional fees. Now he was going to use the bonus he was entitled to for Caroline's trip, but Miranda needed the money more than that. After all, this was not about entertainment, but about life. After hearing all his arguments in favor of the operation, Caroline became furious. Are you crazy? Or have you forgotten? I'm your mother, not her. She'll wait for the quota. She'll be patient. She'll wait for the quota. I don't want to throw that kind of money down the drain. Or have you forgotten? I'm your mother, not her. She'll wait for the quota. She'll be patient. She'll wait for the quota. I don't want to throw that kind of money down the drain. Harry tried to stop her angry monologue, but Caroline only shouted and fidgeted more, clutching at her heart, theatrically gulping for air as if she couldn't breathe. He was even afraid that now the mother would become quite bad and would have to call an ambulance. He came home depressed, all picked up words, how to tell Catherine that it is necessary to delay Miranda's operation, that his mother is also in poor health. He postponed the conversation for the evening. Let everyone go to bed. He will then talk to his wife. She will understand him and give him all the savings. But it was also true that they wouldn't be able to raise the damn money for Miranda again. At 10 p.m., Harry received a call from Caroline. She didn't speak but whispered into the receiver in a weak, pained voice. He was finally upset. If before he still had doubts about how to proceed, now they had dissipated. Harry hugged Catherine and hesitated to start the conversation, but then he took in more air and spoke. Catherine, listen. I've been thinking your mother is a strong woman. Why should she have surgery right now? Can't she wait? I was at my mum's today. She's really sick. The trip to the sanatorium on the seaside is not canceled. She's a delicate woman, accustomed to constant comfort, and your mother is a fighter against circumstances. She can do without all those doctors for a few more months. I can guarantee you that. Catherine looked at her husband, thinking at first that he was delirious, but he continued his monologue, still proving and convincing her. The woman jerkily got out of bed, pulled on a terry dressing gown, for a while disappeared into the bowels of the flat, but quickly returned. In her hands was a mobile phone. She held it out silently to Harry. I love you very much, Harry, the way you are weak-willed, soft, easily influenced by Caroline. You never became a well-earning husband during our life together, which is what other women are so attracted to in men. Click on the audio tape I brought you. God knows I wouldn't want you to ever hear it, but without it, you're unlikely to believe me. Now you're going to hear me, you sneaky man, so be it. I've been gathering this collection of mine for a long time, and then I've edited it into the whole thing. You switch it on, you'll understand everything now. Harry pressed the start button on the menu and listened, immediately recognizing his mother's voice. Miranda, what maternal love, what are you talking about? My Harry, he's a slob, he's a wimp, he's plasticine. You can mold him into anything you want. You have Catherine, a girl with character, and my son, loser, though I do not like all these modern slang words, but more accurately and cannot say. There was a hiss on the speaker. Then the next tape came on. Catherine, don't tell me how to treat my son. You can treat him any way you want, but for me he's a source of fulfillment. A workhorse, an eternally indebted son, who doesn't even realize that I'm manipulating him all the time. The next entry was quite recent. Miranda, I'm bored. It's spring, and I wish Harry would send me to a sanatorium to stretch my bones. I've been sitting at home. I've got to find out what his fee's worth. I'll pretend to be sick and weak, and he'll swim away, like he always does. Harry listened to all this and couldn't believe his ears. He turned sharply to his wife. Where did you dig all this up, Catherine? I didn't expect something like this from you. You're a homegrown sterlitz. It's simple, Harry. These aren't Caroline's first revelations about you. I thought I'd put them all together. I wanted to talk to her one more time about how you can't be so patronizing and uncaring about your son, that you're a living person, that you're actually kind, warm-hearted, and love her very much. You know that she rarely comes to our house, but if she does not deny herself a drink. It's after a few glasses of wine that all these confessions usually start. You're busy with something else, you don't participate in our women's gatherings, and after the guests leave. At first I just listened and didn't write anything down, but then I decided that I had to put her in her place. That you can't treat her like that. That she is like a disease for you. You decide for yourself how to live with it and what to do, but I won't give her money for the sanatorium. That's enough. In the middle of the night in the early spring, Harry threw on only a light jacket and went out into the cold darkness. His soul ached so much that he felt as if he were dying of grief, the same grief that one feels when one buries one's parents, when there is only longing for them and dark hopelessness ahead. He knocked on the door of Caroline's flat in the morning, and she was unprepared for his visit. Caroline met him in expensive silk pajamas with a layer of nourishing cream on her face. Behind her, she could see the bedroom, the realm of nightly rest. The superintendent asked irritably from the threshold, "Did you bring money for my trip?" This dried herring agreed that my health should be improved first, and then her operation should be dealt with. No, Harry answered her confidently, "That's not what I came to tell you. Mind you, I am no longer sick with boundless filial love for you. An end to this unnecessary affliction, an end to all my futile endeavors to try to be necessary and important to you. Miranda will go to New York for the operation because she, not you, was my real second mother, and now she will be my first. Live your life as you know how. Only call me if something serious actually happens to you, without lying. I'm not a monster, I'll help you, but I'll never give you another piece of my heart. Instead, I have ash, emptiness, ashes there now. It's your handiwork." Harry slammed the door. Caroline was left utterly bewildered. She thought snidely, "Where are you going to go? You'll come crawling back in a couple of days." But he did not come, not in 2 days, not in a week, not in a month, not in a year. The phone, which she now carried everywhere with her, was silent. What if her son called? His footsteps did not sound in the entrance. No one hurried to take her dreams right off the tip of her tongue and try to fulfill them. She spent her life alone, a snow queen with a cold heart and royal pretensions. Well, that was her choice and her current fate. The lights in Miranda's room were dimmed. It had been 2 weeks since the surgery. Miranda had long since proudly walked down the corridor with her daughter or son-in-law at her side. Everything had gone as it should. The doctors claimed the process had been stopped in time. Miranda had a natural question. With whom did the children leave their grandchildren at home? Did Caroline sacrifice her comfort and personal freedom? Harry and Catherine looked at each other conspiratorially. Then Catherine confessed. "Mummy, don't you start grumbling, much less wondering and swearing. We have a very nice man helping us out. He took care of the kids for us. I think they are in safe and decent hands waiting for us from Los Angeles." Harry complimented his wife. "When you and Catherine left, I was at home with the kids doing homework, and then someone timidly rang the doorbell. I opened the door and there was a fit man with a colorful bouquet of flowers and a large cake. 'He's asking for you, Mum.' I asked him who he was, of course, and he told me in no uncertain terms that he's loved you all his life. So he decided to come to our house for a visit. I believed him right away, but he just kept repeating and repeating how you were at university, and he watched you from behind a lilac bush, how you were walking home from class, taking bites out of your baguette." Miranda smiled softly, thinking, "Oh, Sebastian found me after all these years and immediately offered his hands, his help. It wasn't my fault that I loved someone else so much. We can be friends now. Having been in heaven mentally before the operation, she began to look at many things differently. They say that we are only given life once. It's a misconception. We die once and life is given to us daily, over and over again. The only question is who uses it and how. Herein lies the basic grain of being.